I'm Maria, and I'm from I'm from RefinedWiki, and we recently moved office. So we moved to this completely new building. So there was only concrete, no ceiling, and no appliances. And one of the first times that the bosses were there, they realized that every electrical outlet throughout the office was a USB outlet. So no regular outlets for computers and coffee machines, nothing like that. So they said, well, they fixed it. They said, we can't use this. They fixed it, and they redid it. And the thing I thought about here is the electrician who got this job for putting in USB outlets for 25 people, why didn't he think like, well, this was strange. Maybe I should question it. No, instead, didn't question it, and they had to redo the job. In order to think critically about things, you need to know what you're doing. And that's the same for you as developers. When you have a requirement, you need to think one step further to make sure it fits the product. I'm a manual tester. I test products and applications from a user's perspective. That means that I'm trying to put myself in the shoes of our customers and see how they experience the product, to make sure whether it's consistent and whether it makes sense, if it's a reasonable amount of input going into it. And while I know that many developers might think manual testing, might as well watch paint dry on a wall, because that's as fun as it gets. I would like to encourage you to actually try it. Scripted manual testing, yes, watching the paint on the wall, that's what a computer can do. But when you try to put yourself in the shoes of your customers, you really get to see different things. So let me give you, also, when you are developers, you can build programs to test your programs. Awesome, automated testing, don't have to do the job yourselves. But us humans actually have still, at least, a few benefits of our minds that the computer doesn't have. Let me give you an example. So each year, me and my kids make a candy for holiday. And we've been doing it since they were small, and it's our favorite piece of candy. And if we were to ask a computer whether we did a good job or not, we could ask questions like this. Is it covered in chocolate? Are they separated from one another? Is there peppermint sprinkled on top? And does it smell or taste the correct way? For a computer, they would say, yes, 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 you did an awesome job. But for you as humans, it takes you a split second to notice that the result is not quite as it was in the book. So I love my kids. They were 3 and 5 when we did this, and they did a really good job for that. But it doesn't look like this. And that's what humans can do. They can test things like this. So what I try to look like when I test our products is the context of things. The context is always important. For instance, if my kid again says, can I slap my brother on the arm? I would say, no, you can't. But if she was to say, can I slap my brother on the arm? There's a mosquito biting him. I might say yes. So putting the features you build into the context of your product makes a lot of difference. So try always and see that. And that's also what a human can do. Also, for every feature you have in your product, there was an intention at one point. Something made someone put this feature into the product. And by knowing what your product does and what it's supposed to do, it will be easier for you to find the intention and see whether it's still relevant. Because something that was relevant 10 years ago might not be relevant today. And by noticing this, you can slim down your product. So today I'm going to share some of my tips on how I do testing. I'll start with how you can plan your path through a product. We'll move on to users and data, how you report bugs, another favorite subject, and then a short summary. So if you already know the entirety of your product, that's great. But if you don't, here are a few tips. First of all, take advantage of the fact that you're humans and do exploratory testing. Exploratory testing is when you just go out into the product and try things. You don't have a script because, again, if it's scripted, then a computer can do it. But if you don't have a script, you can walk here and then you can walk over here. One thing that can happen when you do exploratory testing is that you end up doing the same things over and over. So you need a plan. And in the testing world, there are two people who are famous. They're called James and Jonathan Bach. And they have invented a methodology, or started a methodology, called session-based testing. And what you do is you set up an amount of time, and for that time, you have a mission or a plan. And that's what they call a charter. So you don't just like wander off and try everything, but you set aside, okay, so today I'm going to try and see what it's like to be a sales rep in this product. Or today I'm going to see if the buttons are the same way throughout the system. So it can be a lot of different things. I will share some examples of this. The one thing I always start with, whenever we have a new feature, or whenever there's a new Confluence, or whenever there's a new JIRA version, I always do a first impressions tour. This is like taking the product for a test drive. It means that if you purchase a car, you go to the car and you say, can I take it for a test drive? Yes. You won't know everything about this car, but you will know how it feels to sit in it. You will know whether it's speedy or slow, how it turns. You will get an idea for the car, whether it's something for you or not. And that's the same thing, sort of, that I do when I test things. So, for instance, if there's a new Confluence, I set it up, install our add-on, and then I just start like going over all of the areas, and I can identify that this area need to put a lot of things in here because they've made updates, so it's changed. And that's a good way to start. It also gives you ideas for other things you want to test. So, another thing you can do is the happy path. And this comes back to the context and intention. The happy path is, to our testers, known as doing exactly what you're supposed to do. Take out the manual, start with number 1, then do number 2, then do number 3. And while I before said that scripted testing is not that fun, what you should do when you do this is, when would I do this? Why would I do this? What's the context of this? When is the user actually doing this? Why is it in here? What's the intention? But then again, if you find a treasure map and you have the X and you come to an exotic island and all of a sudden you see dolphins over here, of course, you should go see the dolphins. And this is the exploratory testing. You should do everything because this is what your users do. They don't just sit like, oh, now I'm going to enter a new page. Let me take out the manual. No, they try it. They click here. Then someone enters the room, and they get interrupted, and they reload the page, and they double-click. But you can single-click. And all of these things is what a user does. So you should try and replicate what they do to see how they experience the product. So another thing you can do, and this is something that a lot of us probably needs to do, if you are working at an add-on vendor or you create add-ons, you need documentation. And if you're a small company, chances are you will be doing it at one point in time. Writing documents and manuals is actually how I got started in testing. I was asked by my former employee to write a configuration manual. And I started out by going through dividing it up into big areas, and then I just deep dove into every feature we had, figuring out what it was, writing it down, and then just to check, I went over to the programmer or the developer and said, oh, is this correct? And he'd be like, no, that's not what it does. I'd be like, really? Because that's what it does. And then we went to the product owner, and we realized what was the correct way. But we identified things that he didn't see, and I identified. Sometimes he was right, sometimes I was right, so it was kind of fun. But it really made me know the product, because I really got into it. So when you do documentation, think of two things. The how is probably the easiest. It's like go to the field, enter the amount, done. The why is, why do I need to enter the amount? Well, it can be something like a sales rep entering amount of giveaways. If you're a sales rep, you can I will hand you a pen. And where I worked, I used to work for not a pharmaceutical company, but we built products for them. And the pharmaceutical reps, sales reps, they could leave pens behind, but they had to calculate the amount of everything they left, because there was a law saying you can't leave anything more than 100 euros. That's a lot, but like 10 euros a year. So the how was enter the amount. The why was because we need to abide by this law. So always have that in mind when you do documentation, because it will put things into context for your customers. And it also helps you know your product. And then one thing that I would like to say, but I'm not sure you will do it unless you're actually writing a document, write it down. Because when you phrase something, you actually need to really get into it. This sometimes happens. What sometimes happens? Yes, this sometimes happens. I get stuck on something, and I call someone over, hey, can you come and help me? And they'd be like, sure. And then I start explaining the situation, and as I'm doing it, I'm like, yeah, no, I don't need you, because I figured it out while I was saying it. And that's why it's good to phrase things, because you actually make it go through here. And that's a really good thing. So, as far as exploratory testing goes, explore the product, use charters, and charters can be about anything. These are just a few examples. But plan your mission. That makes it so that you can have a goal and an agenda, but if you see something exciting over here, take a detour, and then get back to your goal and agenda. I usually aim this for an hour, because that's as long as I can keep attention, and no one else bothers me. So setting off an hour and just focusing on one of the things, that's all you need, and you can do piece by piece. And since we're working with Atlassian, what I do for my planning is that I have things in Confluence. I keep my charters in Confluence. So if there's a new Confluence version, I have a 19 charter test plan that I go through to make sure our product works. And then I log it towards Capture for JIRA. Capture for JIRA has a few key features. It's, in my opinion, it's rather small, but it's powerful. You can do screenshots, and you can add arrows and text on the screenshot. It captures your environment. And then what it does is that it can log your test sessions. That means that it starts, and then it logs every issue you file or if you enter notes, and then you can stop it. So you can see what you did during this charter. That is something I really like. So once you start testing everything, you need to understand your users and the data that is in the system. So, first tip, step away from the admin login, because your users, unless you have very specific users, they're probably not an admin in your system. And why do you think, oh, does it make such a big difference? Yes, it does. They see different things on the screen. They have different graphical representation because they can do less things. They can also they don't have the same permissions. They're regular users. So things that you see might not be visible to the rest of the users. My next tip is to try and find out who is actually using your product. What kind of companies are you selling to? Is it IT companies where you have developers who is a certain way? Or is it sales products? Or is it a database thing? Whatever you have, whatever users you have, try and figure out who they are and what roles they have at their companies. All this with the intention of getting their user behavior down. It can also be that if you're working towards developing companies, they would be more inclined to using shortcuts and have a certain way of doing things. Whereas if you're working towards a company that has, like my father, if he were to work somewhere, he has a different computer behavior than I do. So that's the reason. Try and figure out what are the ages, what are their roles. Once you figure this out, use personas. So what I do, I have a standard setup. I always enter these users into every system. It's like, isn't that tedious? No, it takes like 3 minutes because I do it all the time, so it's quite fast. For my testing, I've settled on these types of users. You always need an admin login because we have configurations, so you need that. That's the boss, can do anything, can access anything. I actually always call her Cecilia, and that's because I have a friend who is kind of bossy, and that's a good thing because she makes us go to spa and she makes us go golfing, but she also makes us do things. But whenever I'm logged in as Cecilia, I know I'm the boss. Then I have the managers, and to me, these are users that can create projects, that administer spaces in Confluence, that creates content and makes it available to everyone, assigns things. I always call them Sebastian and Anna, and if I'm logged in as them, I know. They're also people from my past. Then I actually only have one that's the user, and that's my cool person called Maria Heij, like the gin. She's the really keen user. She comments on things, and she really wants to participate. And when I'm logged in as her, I do everything. I like click everything, and I try to explore what there is. And then recently, I've been testing a lot in JIRA Service Desk, because we have a new product for JIRA Service Desk, so I've been learning that. And in JIRA Service Desk, you have this kind of special user group called customers. So they're in JIRA, but they don't have any access to JIRA, but they can see the customer portals of things. And for these people, I always call them something on an F, starting with the first name F. So Fatima, Frederick, Freya, and Philip. If I have one of these, and it starts with an F, I know that I'm not supposed to see JIRA. So if I see JIRA, something is wrong. So by making it easy like this, I also make faces for them. They always look the same, so I really know that I'm logged in as them, and I try to mimic their behavior. Once you figure out who's using your system, try and figure out what their setup is. Because I'm lucky, I work at a company where we have really big screens, which is super awesome, but that doesn't mean that our customers experience that as well. They might have small screens, where everything is all of a sudden scrollable, and we didn't even realize because we were using our big screens. So, of course, you cannot buy everything, like we have like a room full of screens. No, but you can do a few tips, a few things. Screen sizes. Change the resolution to your screen. See what it looks like if you make it smaller. Also, browsers. Test all of the browsers that there is, and this is, to be honest, like the most boring thing, because you have to test everything. But do it as you do it throughout the way. Log in as an admin in one browser, and then log in as a different user, like Anna, in another browser, and just switch between the two, and you will see what they see. And then you're like, but I'm on a Mac, and Internet Explorer doesn't run on a Mac anymore. Well, there are 3 options for this. You can use virtual machines. And I do this all the time, and I have a Mac, and I can run all of the systems, and they're actually developers instance, so if you go online and Google that, you can find how to set that up. That means that you can actually see what everything looks like. And it's actually quite good because, scroll bars, for instance, they look a certain way in Mozilla Firefox, and then you go to Internet Explorer, and they're much wider, so everything looks a little bit off. Then the 4th thing is the mobile devices. And my biggest thing to get across here is the emulator in Chrome. It's super awesome. It can really give you a picture, but unfortunately, it doesn't give you the full picture. What happens is that once you're on a device, other things play a part. So you have networking issues, or you have flipping issues, and just trying it on a mobile device at one point is my advice to you. Just see what it looks like. And if you don't have, scramble up what you have at the office. I'm lucky enough to have my phone that is unlike everyone else's, so I can use that and get another glimpse of what it looks like. And then we have data. So using data in the system is, of course, crucial, because otherwise you might not need a system. What I try and do is to use real data. And do you need to understand the data? Well, if you're just producing a feature, it might be sufficient that you put test, 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 test inside it. But what that does is it never shows you what the customer sees. They don't have a system full of tests. Where you put test that is this long, they might put a sentence that is this long. And all of a sudden, what it looks like looks differently. So try and do data that's actually accurate. And of course, reuse it. I don't invent the wheel every time. For our official test server, I have invented my own company called Urban Computing, because the guy who founded it is Urban, and urban, it's a pun. And I use that, and I've entered 150 people in there. And sometimes when I test, I log in as this person or this person, which makes our system continuously fill with data. So it actually looks, it's not like the last post was from 2012, it's actually new. So it refills it. But when there's Confluence 6.2 beta, I'm not that ambitious. What I do is I put in my favorite spaces: cookies, candy, barbecue, and cake. And then I fill it up with recipes and pictures of me baking, and, well, that's enough. But I don't invent it. I just go with whatever I usually put it in, so it doesn't have to be hard. So, if you don't know where to start with putting in the data, it's like our system is so complex. I have a few tips for you. First of all, at RefinedWiki, I do test and support, which is a really good combination, because support, you get to see what your customers do. They actually send you pictures of what it looks like, and you can see, oh, you did this, didn't even think about it. They feed me with information about how they use their products. So it's like being handed things on a silver platter. And support can be kind of tricky, because if you don't know your product, how can you support it? Team up with someone, find a senior developer, see what they do when they do support. Another thing you can do is to find a demo setup, or if you have a sales team, they probably have some sort of environment that you can take a peek look in and see what it looks like. And another place where I've learned so much is sitting in on meetings. It's like gold, it's like support, but even better. Especially if you sit in on a consultant meeting, where the customer tells them their issues. The senior developer says, well, it works like this, and they try to fit them together. And you see what your customers are facing, and how that can be balanced together. And if you don't have customer meetings, you might be like us, we're just a vendor. No, we're not just a vendor, we're of course a vendor. But we don't have customer meetings, unless we're at Summit. But you can sit in on consultant meetings, or requirement meetings, where you're discussing things. All of these sort of meetings where you discuss the product is really valuable on understanding the product. And you can ask questions. That's excellent. And then fourth tip, what every kid does, watch someone else do it. Just stand, don't stand next to them. Tell them that you're actually standing next to them before you start watching them. But stand next to them and see what they're doing, because they might be using shortcuts you didn't even know. They might be clicking on different paths that you didn't even know. So watching someone else do it, and this can be between me and my coworkers, I'm like, you do it like that? And all of this is very informative on building your knowledge about how the product works. So, moving on. When you start using your products, you're bound to find issues. That means you need to report stuff. And reporting tickets can be really funny, and it can also be like, oh, no, I have to report another one. In my experience, I hesitate about reporting things if it's troublesome to do it. I've been in systems where you have like 100 million fields, and you need to put this in and that in, and you need pictures and stuff. Keep it simple, and people are more inclined in doing it. Because if you find something that's wrong with your product and you don't report it, it can tell you a few things. Either you don't care if this reaches a customer, they can have the bug, I don't care. Or it's like, someone else will find it. And that means that your time is more valuable than the next guy who finds it. So, to me, reporting things you see, letting it go through the triaging system and to the backlog or a sprint, shows that you actually care about the product. You care about making this a good quality piece that people can use. So, let's think about the bug product. Or the bug product, the bug reports. The bug report, who reads the bug report? Well, for starters, it's the person who enters it. Then it's the person who triages it, deciding on whether it goes to the backlog or to the sprint. Then it's the person developing it or fixing it. Then if you have some sort of review system, that person reads it too. And then finally, if you have a QA like me, that person reads it too. So everything you enter will be read by several people, and if you make it hard to read or hard to understand, the time it takes to understand it is like multiplied several times. But for you, seeing the issue, it's quite easy to just put in a screenshot or a little bit more information. And two things you should consider also is, again, who will read it? What's their level of knowledge? If it's just read by developers, you might be able to put in things like the REST API doesn't connect to the backend. And everyone will know what that means. But if someone else reads this, especially if it's a public ticket, that your customers can actually read this, make sure it's top-notch, that they can understand it, and that it looks good. Again, showing that you care, that the result is good. How long does a ticket live? Well, did you ever delete anything from JIRA? If you didn't, it lives forever. Sometimes, of course, you delete something if it's like, okay, this is logged against the wrong system or something like that. But otherwise, it's actually in there, and people can read it over and over. And again, public issue tracker might be that it's open, and you want to show that transparency to your customers, that we have this, we've just decided on not doing it, but it can be there forever. Forever. Now I'm doing air quotes for people who can't see my hands. And then finally, clear and concise. Clear and concise, again, means putting the things that matters into it and not being fancy. Like, for instance, for my summary, I always try and summarize it so that I can see the entire sentence in like the create mode, and then I have to rephrase it a couple of times, but by the time I'm done, it's easy and concise to see instead of, is this actually working as it should screen? Just make it, investigate this. Be clear and concise. So, writing the bug product, I believe in keeping things simple for a couple of reasons. Easier to read, easier to do. At RefinedWiki, we've sort of landed on, this is ever developing though, so over the 2 years I've been there, I thought I would make 2,000 tickets by the time I stood here, but I'm at like 1,950. That does not mean that we're not doing a good job. It means that we're finding the issues in our products and we can fix them. It's better on knowing things. But at RefinedWiki, we've settled on a few things. So for of course, the summary, but also the description is steps to reproduce, expected result, and actual results. And the reason we have both expected result and actual results is that sometimes I'm expecting the wrong thing. And that could mean two things. Either that the product is not very clear and intuitive on how this is, or that I actually misinterpreted it. But having both expected result and what actually happens gives the developer and the triaging person an opportunity to see whether what I was expecting and what the result was, whether I was understanding this correctly or not. The metrics we don't do that many metrics. We do, of course, project, because otherwise it would be very hard to find where this bug report should be. We do priority, and that I usually try and understand it. You know, sometimes it can be like, this button is the wrong color. Super minor thing, but every customer seeing this thing will be like, the button is the wrong color, what's this? This system, I can't work with it. We have different views of things. And since I'm representing the user, I'm trying to be like, this is high priority, takes 2 seconds to fix, but it's a high priority to make our product look good. And then, of course, the environment. And you can put in fields. This is totally up to you. You can put in fields for the environment and have, if you use Capture for JIRA, it will log the environment you're actually in, if you use the plugin for the browser. But what we do is simple. Either I put it in the summary, like IE11, : this doesn't work. Or I just put it as the first steps to reproduce. 1, open Internet Explorer 11. 2, go to this page. It doesn't have to be very complicated, but you need to point it out. One thing I also recommend you on doing is to configure JIRA, because JIRA, this is what JIRA is made for. And JIRA can be very complex, and if you feel like, I don't know JIRA, you can use the charter tips from before to get to know it. But configuring JIRA makes it, you can make so that bug reports, when you have issue type bug, it shows a scheme of fields, so that everyone filing a bug sees this, everyone filing a story sees this. So make JIRA work for you instead of the other way around. Configure it to meet your needs. So, a summary on this. As vendors, we're in this together. It's especially clear when you're at Summit, because all of us, I'm a tester, and I'm up at the Summit floor showing our products with the developers and the co-founders. Everyone takes on the proudness of our product and showing it to everyone. We're working as a team to produce good things for our customers. It's important to be able to lift your head and not just focus, even though it's very important to focus on the features and this is so cool, try to lift your head and see where in the context does this fit in. What's the intention? What are the pros for the customers? Why should they buy this? The developer's point of view often is, what APIs can I use? Is there a cool new feature or something else I can put into it? Can I optimize it to be even faster? Whereas the customer will think, how does this help me? Will it solve my issues? Is it reasonable, the way this product is set up? Looking at a product from two different views is really, it shows you so much on why the product is there to begin with. I've always liked knowledge. I like knowing things about everything. I learn about horses because my daughter likes horses. So before I couldn't clean the hoof of a horse, I can do that now. And I learn about the processors when my husband talks to me about, do you know, AMD just released this new processes thing? And I learn, apparently not that much. But I always like knowledge. I like knowing things. And the more you know, the better you are. Even though horses doesn't have anything to do with this, I have a new knowledge. And I encourage you to do that. Spend some time in your product. Set aside some time to go over the areas that you don't know or that you're wanting to know more about, to see whether it's consistent. If you're working on this area and a different team is working here, make sure it makes sense to the customer who's actually visiting both. And finally, in Sweden, we have a person who's actually still alive, but in the 80s, he was the CEO of Scandinavian Airlines. Scandinavian Airlines was going really bad in the 80s, and then he was employed and flipped it, and it was really good. And about all of this, he wrote a book. His name is Jan Karlsson, and he wrote a book that's in English. In English, it's called Moments of Truth. In Swedish, if you translate it, it would be Tear Down the Pyramids. And what he means by that is tearing down the organizational pyramids. And if you were at the talk that Tanji just had here, he also talked about taking pride and being part of the team, making the team do decisions. And that's what this book is about. Hand out responsibility to the people who actually do things. So we turned Scandinavian Airlines around, and everything was good. And whereas the book was called Tear Down the Pyramids, I would like to paraphrase a bit and be like, when you come home from work, do you want to be the guy who says, what did you do at work today? I carried a rock all day long. Or do you want to be the person when you get asked, what did you do at work today? I helped build the pyramids by carrying a rock. It's all a matter of attitude. Thank you.